Hi, I'm Bruce Barkauer with the Center for Faith and Giving in Indianapolis, Indiana. Our mission is to create a culture of generosity across the life of the church, and I'm pleased to be participating in the Northern California, Nevada region's ACTS program, the Academy of Christian Training and Service, as we begin our third session looking at themes of abundance and themes of stewardship in both the First and Second Testaments. Again, I express my appreciation to the Reverend Dr. Ben Bourne for the opportunity to participate with you. We spent a little bit of time in our last session talking about relationship. In our first session, we spent time with the overarching themes around stewardship, and now we're kind of drilling down in detail, and one of those that we talked about was the issue of Sabbath, the idea of rest. Well, I am here in the Gulf of Mexico where lots of folks go for vacation, the opportunity for rest and renewal, which is really a little bit of what Sabbath is all about. This understanding of the body's need to get away from the pressures of work and the anxieties that we carry in life and have time for rest and renewal. The pattern of Sabbath is established for us early in the reading of the book of Genesis. As we get into the second chapter, after 6 days of creation, we understand that there's a day of rest to be taken first by God. After the establishment and the order of all things out of the chaos, a day off is given. That day off sets up for creation a little bit about the nature of relationship and a lot about self-understanding. That to observe Sabbath is to respect the Creator as a command to follow, but also an awareness that we are the creation and not the Creator. That the world does not exist solely because of our frenetic ability to continue to create and make things. That ultimately what we have and what we need is given as a providential gift from God, and it's inherent in the fabric of the way in which God has made the cosmos, the way in which it has been spoken into being. The Sabbath is a celebration of that ability to take time for rest and renewal. It plays a major role in Israel's self-understanding. After all, as Israel's story develops, Sabbath becomes an expression of freedom, because what is it that a slave cannot do? A slave cannot take a day off. A slave must work under the oppression of Pharaoh day after day to make and produce those things which ultimately the slave does not possess. So for Israel's self-understanding, Sabbath is a critical way of expressing faithfulness. It's also a way of expressing trust. When we look at the Sabbath stories that are connected with the traveling or the wandering of the children of Israel in the wilderness, we think about the manna and the idea that you could collect a day's worth of manna. If you were not sure about tomorrow and you collected an extra amount, the whole thing became wormy. Actually vomitous, one way to understand the Hebrew word there, that it was all spoiled by the inability to take just enough for one day, except of course on the day before the Sabbath, when an extra portion could be collected and it was preserved and held into the next day, and it was a sign of trust and awareness of God's provision, that even in the wilderness, even in a new and different place, God was present and able to provide. So Sabbath, as an exercise in self-care and as an exercise in trust, both honors who we are in the relationship with the Creator and helps us exercise trust in belief that God will provide for us what we need. Jesus in the Gospels talks about this in Matthew's Gospel in the Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about the idea that we shouldn't worry about what we shall wear or what we shall eat, that we need to believe that God will provide all of these things for us. Now, I don't know about you, but I have awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning worrying about just those things and all of the other things that come around trying to lead life and have a family and make sure that things are provided for. But Jesus is saying that these are not the most essential things for worry, that preoccupation with them creates an anxiety that is unhealthy. He suggests that the birds don't sow or reap, and yet They are provided for the daily needs that they have each day. That the flowers of the field don't toil or spin, and yet Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. So too, Jesus says you should not worry about what you will wear, about what you will eat. Don't be preoccupied with those things. Trust that God will provide what you need when you need it. He tells a few parables for us to help emphasize that in some different ways. One of the parables that he tells is a rather disturbing one of a fellow who is very successful in his crop and the yield of his fields, produces an abundance beyond what even his current storehouses will hold. And so he tears down the barns that he has in order to build bigger barns, has a conversation only with himself about how successful he is, how well off he is, that he can eat, drink, and be merry and not have to worry about a thing. And Jesus in the parable then says that the angel of the Lord comes to him and that very night says, your life is required of you. What then of all of your stuff? Other parables that Jesus tells that talk about our things and the way in which they can get in the way of our relationships and distort who we are as people. All three Gospels tell of a young person who is referred to in one place as young, in another place as rich, in another as ruler, who comes to Jesus wanting to know what he must do to inherit eternal life. And Jesus looks at him and says, well, you need to keep the law. And the part of the law that Jesus talks about is not the love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, and strength, not the notion of no idols, and not those pieces of the law, but the part of the law that Jesus talks about is the relational pieces of the law that function on the human level. Don't covet, don't cheat, don't lie, don't steal. These are the things that Jesus points to, and the young man looks at Jesus and says, I've done all these things from my youth. And Mark's gospel gives us this wonderfully poignant moment. It says that Jesus looked at him and loved him and says, there's just one more thing you need to do. Sell all of your possessions, give them to the poor, and come and follow me. The gospel tells us that the man went away sad because he had many things. We could argue that many things had him. And so the nature of our possessions and how we handle these things, Jesus gives us cautionary notes and talks about how these things can produce anxiety for us. While down here this week, involved in a filming project for the Center for Faith and Giving, aside from this piece we're doing today, we had an unfortunate encounter with a young man who had a very expensive vehicle, who in the process of parking in cars and getting in and out of vehicles, our door appeared to brush up against his vehicle. He was not present at the time, his wife was, and she talked about the importance of respect, which seemed a little puzzling and out of place, and it was very much an accident, and we couldn't perceive any damage being done. But the next thing we know, this gentleman appeared at the door of the place where we were staying and wanted us to come down and examine his vehicle and be prepared to suffer the consequences and pay for the damages. We came down to the parking lot and fortunately discovered that our vehicle could not have done the damage that he was pointing to. But it was troubling to see how anxious this very expensive vehicle, that he went on to tell us how much he paid for it and how much he pays to keep it looking that way, that this had become a real power control in his life, and it had distorted the relationships that he and his significant other were able to engage in with other people, and seeing perhaps his own value wrapped up simply in this vehicle as opposed to the intrinsic worth that he has. Just because he is. So our thoughts for today in our discussion want to focus on how our wealth can interfere with our relationships, interfere with our sense of self. and how the celebration of Sabbath leads to an act of trust and a sense of well-being, for that's really what God intends for us.